This video was directly inspired by Jeremy from Craft, and if you haven't seen his video yet, check out the link in the description. Oh, and welcome! To get started, I rated my bits box. I think like most people who do this hobby, I just don't throw anything away. You never know when some small part could be crucial for a future build. For the base of this project, I used plastic lids from some spice jars, but I actually cut off the top part of the jar as well, where the lid screws on. This gives me more material to glue onto, but also I can actually open and close the body of this thing now and store stuff inside of it, like as an interactive loot drop for players after they defeat this thing. To secure the two lids to one another, I'm cutting out a small circle of EVA foam. Basically, this is just scrap foam that I had on hand. And I'm cutting the circle oversized and slowly trimming it down to get a more perfect fit. This is the only piece of EVA foam that I have on hand right now, and if I cut away too much, then I'm going to be pretty hosed. And thankfully, it was pretty much a perfect fit when I glued it together. Now, for the legs, I wanted to give this thing as much presence as possible to make it very arachnid looking. So I decided to do 4 digits for each leg, and these are super simple. After I had my rough design, I cut out a pattern and started tracing it over and over again on cardstock from cereal boxes, and then I doubled these up and super glued them together. I actually ended up making way more than I needed, but this way I had some leftovers in case I lost the pattern or accidentally threw it away. Once I had the legs glued into their final shape, I started covering the whole thing with super glue and baking soda, partly for the texture and mostly to give it some added strength. Once the legs were ready, I went back to my bits box and found some plastic and metal washers, a few gears from a very cheap beginner sewing machine. All of these are just super glued to hold them into place. To add some spikes onto the body, I'm using toothpicks and cutting them oversized so I can come back and whittle them down. A little bit of hot glue helps me tack the toothpicks into place, and once I'm sure that they're in their final position, I'm going to come back and hit them with some more super glue and baking soda. Using a plastic lid from a spice jar, I position the legs into their final pose, and this way I can add the pairs onto the body at the same time. And so far, I'm really happy with the way it looks. Now it's time for my favorite part of any project, adding 2 quick coats of gray primer. This is when it starts to actually look like an actual thing. It's not just a bunch of super glued junk anymore, it's starting to look like a finished product. This is the time to step back and look at what you've been making to find any problem spots that you need to touch up. For me, I needed to add way more texture onto the smooth surfaces and cover up some text on one of the gears that I had missed. There's lots of different ways that you can do this, but the best way I've found is just using super glue and baking soda. In the spirit of using only what I have on hand, I grabbed one of my chip brushes and some super cheap black acrylic paint so I could start smothering this entire thing. I'm not worried about it looking too splotchy because this is supposed to be a really crusty, old looking robot. Once the whole thing was based with some black paint, I took a rattle can of bronze spray paint and sprayed that into a plastic lid. Then I could quickly do a dry brush over the entire surface. Now, to be fair, this is a very heavy-handed dry brush. It's giving it a very steampunk kind of look. And I knew that as I hit it with some different washes later on, it would dull the effect down. And for my washes, I did one in black, dark brown, and a much lighter sienna. And I also used a heat gun in between each coat of paint because I'm very impatient when it comes to painting things. I took a rattle can of gold spray paint, sprayed that into a plastic tray, and this time I used a toothpick just to hit some of the edges of the crawler. I wanted to give it a few brighter highlight details. And finally, it was time to add some blood effects. This is again another super cheap and very bright red acrylic paint, but as it dries, it dulls down quite a lot, so it ends up looking more like a dried, gross blood. This was a really fun project and a great way to use up some old scrap materials I had lying around. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if you haven't seen Jeremy's video yet, please go check it out. His looks amazing. I hope to keep making more of these videos, so if you could share it, that would be awesome. If you liked it, hit the button, and if you want to see more, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.